Alright everyone, welcome along So, day 7 of our training Tuesday, taking you from zero to hero. We've got to a point, haven't we? Right? So we've gone through the first few weeks in terms of building those tables up. So you get your first table, your second table, thinking through the critical ones that you're going to need and getting that whole piece started slopped together. And then you start to think about really what's a data set look like and how do we take those tables and put them together. And the challenge I set for you yesterday was around thinking about what is it that's going to work for my business in terms of the refresh cycles and everything that's going to come through and land me with a structured data set with what I need when I need it and in a timely fashion without breaking the bank, because there's always going to be that piece of work that you need to go through and understand, is this right, is it wrong? So it'd be ideal, for example, to have like instant, but the realities are it doesn't matter, right? In your sales to date report, where we are at 10 a.m. versus midday is unlikely to really have a bearing on it. And in fact, if you went through and broke your granularity, remember that word, granularity, and had that hourly report available live, right, I can almost guarantee that you'd have senior management going, where are we, right? Analysis paralysis is real, it is a thing, and you need to think about it because excess data is just as bad as insufficient data. So the role of a good data analytics team and your job in your business is going to be to serve up the right information, the right place, the right time. So you could have that report showing what's going on constantly on the shop floor, how many open orders have we got, what sales have gone through in the last half hour, right? But you wouldn't want that going up to line management, or not line management, up to senior management. Line management might be interested in it, and you wouldn't put it in the context of a month. You would only ever put it in terms of where are we now, today, the today, that focused, open, work in progress style of report. And that can have a different granularity, but it's different from the strategic side that you've got. So we're starting to also come across that concept, aren't we? Where you've got strategic focus and you've got an operational focus of analytics. And one thing and a challenge that you'll often find is, can the two coexist? And they can, right? It's possible. But what we're going to do is look a bit more at the strategic side, because that's the majority of what your analytics is going to be. Operational analytics is a thing, it is important to understand, but it's got some different subtleties to it. So we're going to stick to the strategic for now, and we'll go back and we'll have a look at the UK or the England food hygiene data set that I've built. So let's cut on over into Power BI desktop and have a look at that now. Alright, so here we are, Power BI desktop. Now, one of the things that it's really important for you to think about and understand is once you've got your data set, you need to start thinking about your aggregations and your measures. And the idea now is also to put in things like measures tables. We're not covering it in today. They're easy enough to set up. They're not a big deal. But what's important is that you understand we've got this report here that we're looking at. We've got all this stuff. We can see what's happening in a particular area. So a local authority, we could drill in. We could see for Durham. We could choose Durham. I've set it up so it brings up as a click through to drill down, and you can then see individual restaurants or areas, GPS locations. But if there's multiple food things in an area, there's multiple things, right? It's only as good as the data, remember. So if we come through, what you can see though is that we've got lots of information. It's not to come through, oh, that's great, we can really work it out, right? Fundamentally though, right? Let's think about this. What's going on, right? If I said to you this, pretty much this whole thing worked essentially on two measures, you might be a little bit taken aback by that. And it is, it's only two measures that are involved in the vast majority of what we do. So what you'll find is as you become a Power BI developer and in your first stages, you'll start to go, right, I need to write measures for it. I need to write measures for it. I need to write measures for that, right? Because if you look at the instructions for a calculate statement, right, which is kind of where you get to, you go, right, so I need to calculate. And I've heard about calculate, and everyone talks about calculate. I need to write a calculate because I need to calculate this, right? And it needs to know what it needs to do. And it's not uncommon, and you get in this whole mindset of, right, I need to tell the measure everything it needs to do. This is what you're going to have. This is what you need to do, right? So you go in, and here we go, just down below, I've written up what the actual text is on Microsoft's website. And it hit me, right? It hit me, I did it, and I've seen it, you know, a good 50, 60, if not more % of people who I train, teach, go through this habit, right? And I love it because it's a real kind of a, once they kind of turn that corner with it. So a couple of measures. So we've got here, you can see, we've got the businesses. So if we click on businesses, see that's just businesses, right? We've got the average hygiene. Average hygiene, okay? So pretty much everything in here is built around businesses and average hygiene. So average hygiene as a measure, it's a bit of a complicated one. It's not one that's like I like to show, but it does a good job for us. So what we're doing effectively is we're taking an average of the values, okay? So don't worry, okay? We're averaging out that. So we've got one measure, okay? Businesses is a simpler one, okay? We're just doing account rows, right? Stock and trade, count rows, right? If you don't do count rows for every fact table that you produce, chances are you've missed a trick, right? Use count rows every table because at some point you're going to know how many of them were there, right? How many orders did we have? How many this? How many that, right? Count rows. Starts off like that. What you have to understand with Power BI is the context of it doesn't come from the measure. It comes from the visualization that you're building and that you're putting together. So we've got businesses by local authority. Okay, you can see businesses, average hygiene. Okay, so far so good. Businesses by type. And we've got businesses by average hygiene. And the only change between the two, okay, if we come out of here, is the x-axis. So in this case, it's business type. And in this case, it's local authority, isn't it? Okay, local authority. So you've got the same chart, but it'll do different things depending on what the axis you use. And this is something that you have to understand. You do not have to code every measure to do what you need it to do. There are times you will need a measure to be a little bit more complicated, like we've got with this average X. So it comes down to these two measures that we're going to have, isn't it? Businesses with the count rows and the average here, which is it's an average X. So we're going to average X of the food hygiene ratings as a table, which is of course here. So that's our fact table. And then we're going to look up the values to get the right average that we need. Okay, because we get that and then we're looking up what value did it have, which is what the lookup value is doing. Right? So we get what's the average rating of them. So between those two, you've covered pretty much everything that you need. right? And you can then use your visualization layer to present that in different ways. So in here, we've got these two charts, so we can look and we can say, well, for Birmingham, what's happened? And we can see then the different ratings for it. Because what you want to see is there a standout, like higher or lower area with it? And you can do all of those things with filters, with things like that. So for example, we could turn and say, well, businesses by type. Well, what's the worst business or the worst average hygiene by business type? So we could look at that and we could say, well, for here, we want to sort this by something different. And I know, and you know, we can go sort axis, change it to average hygiene, and let's then change that again to be where the hygiene is the lowest, so sorting ascending. And we can then see its takeaways are the ones that seem to have potentially the lowest score. And does that follow through in other areas? So we could randomly click through a couple of the top and see, is it takeaways that keeps coming up as the top? So here, for example, in Westminster, it's distributors that seem to be the lowest. But I'm sure if we hovered over there, we'd see there's only one or two of it. But anyway, okay, the key thing, simple measures, and you use your visualization layer to make it simpler. So we've got our total business count. So if I click on Birmingham, for example, you'll see it filters to show me the total business count. We'll see it filters to show the average hygiene. And then we've got those average hygiene broken down by types. We could pick somewhere else and see it. We can see the map jumps to that location as well. If we come out of here, you can see the color coding on the maps is relative because it's using that average hygiene rating to work out where is a good place to go. So we can see here, the River Tees doesn't have many businesses. It's only got 5 businesses there. Oh, sorry, 5 businesses. Is it 5 businesses? Yeah, 5 businesses available there, but they've got very low, relatively low average food hygiene. 4 is terrible for an area to have that. So, you'd expect that there's obviously some stuff that's lower. See here, there's 4 restaurants with an average rating of 3.75. So we could say, well, what's happening there? So we drill through and get to that next level of information on it. Okay? But what we've got is everything tied to 2 measures. So what have you reckoned then? Right? It's a really important changing moment in your development of I'm now a developer in Power BI. Is when you recognize that simplistic DAX is the way to go. The simpler that you can write your DAX, the better you will find your Power BI goes. And that there is why we have to model correctly. Because if we get our data models wrong, we have to write more complicated DAX to return the right values that we're going to need. Okay? So we go right back, don't we? All the way back to our tables that we're pulling in from somewhere else. They have to be pulled through, curated, processed to build tables, right? I have a table here. Okay? Those tables are then drawn together, aren't they? Pulling them together into a data set, okay? And that data set needs to be properly structured in terms of its facts, its dimensions, with things properly connected so that the compression algorithms can properly operate and you can then most efficiently build your simple simple aggregations that will draw together a simple column. So total sales, for example, is a sum of that column. But if we say, if you remember, if we went back to our whiteboard briefly, so if we said, well, what's our, so tables, data sets, measures. So total sales is going to be sum of amount, isn't it? Okay, put it in there because it's a column, yeah? So in the square brackets because it's a column. So sum of amount. But that's always going to be by what? So by date, by product, sales agent. Okay? And those are all going to be there. So that would then become, if we had a look at our pen, different colour. So we've got our fact, D1, D2, D3, okay? Our dimensions. And you're going to have those like any combination of it, aren't you? So last Thursday, how many coffee tables did Ross sell? Right? Fact. Total sales last Thursday, product of coffee tables, agent Ross. Right? Okay? And it's really tempting to say, right, I have to write this measure, filter by date, which is this selection, filter by product, which will be this selection, filter by sale, which will be, right? You don't need to do it. You use that, and Power BI will then run that filter algorithm for you as part of the table select side of a Power BI visualization. You said table select. No one's mentioned table select to me. Okay. We'll cover that as well. One of the things that you need to think through or understand is every visualization in Power BI, and it doesn't matter what it is, right? They all do exactly the same thing first. They will first run a DAX statement to return a table of data, which is why we're talking about what's the table select, right? If that table takes a long time to return, your visualization is going to take a long time to appear on the page. So when you start to get into optimization concepts, which we'll do probably day 9 or 10, right, we'll start to talk about that, you need to be thinking about, well, what are we selecting from and where? Right? Some functions are efficient, some functions are less efficient. We'll go through and we'll cover a couple of things on those, some little gotchas, understanding what's going on. Okay? But it's really important that when you look at code for DAX, that you start to think through what's going on with it. Right? A count rows is actually saying count the rows of the table that's returned by the time the filters are applied. Because the filters are applied, and you can tell they're applied because they're clearly labelled there in your Power BI. If we go back, we can check, remember? Okay, because for any of your visuals that you've got, don't forget you've got that. There's no filters affecting it. But if I was to pick on that and then hover over it, you can see there's now an included filter. Okay? These filters are applied all the time. You'll see as well, you've got filters on all pages, filters on this page. So there are filters that are being applied throughout, and all those are applied before it gets to this point here. And then the last thing is for it to say, right, so we've got the total table size, but then we need to know for takeaways, how many have come back and what was their score. And that's where you can see that table by going on the 3 dots, show as a table. And it'll show you this is the table that it's built to run your chart or to build your chart. And any visual you can run that on. So have a look, don't be afraid to have a look and see what's coming back from it. Yeah? Champion. Okay? So hopefully, I hope you're not going like, oh man, what? I don't understand. I've thrown a lot of information at you, I know. What I want you to remember, right, and the one takeaway that you need to have is start simple, okay? If you're opening Gambit on, I've got my new Power BI thing, I'm going to write this 20-page DAX measure that's going to do everything, right, and have all the filters built in there, right, you're doing it wrong. Do a simple one, like sum, okay, or count, like count rows, sum. Right? Just stick to the really simple aggregations, max, min, average, right? And then only when that stops working, think about why that's not working, and that's then when you need to go to the next step. And it might be to go down the route of an X function, it might be to go down the route of a calculate, it might be to go down the route of another thing to do. But by keeping it simple from the outset, it means that when your data set has to expand, which if we're doing it right, it will, okay? Because you're always going to get, oh, can we just add that? Oh, right, I know we've got products, but can we add colours? Or, oh, like, I know we've got, can we add? Like, that's how we get to it. Because remember, we want one data set to rule them all, don't we? So we need to think, how am I going to make it simple to expand? And the way you make it simple is by using simpler DAX. Yeah? All right. So have a great week, right? Stay safe, take care, and we'll catch up next week. Ta-ra.